Reading is popular again, and that's low-key a problem because why are we using AI-generated summaries and counting it as reading? In the past few years, reading has deviated from being a hobby to somewhat of an online subculture. And it isn't limited to BookTok or BookTube and has branched out to celebrities where even Dua Lipa feels the need to pose with a little life on a beach. So much so, the performance has become so intense that influencers brag about finishing 100 books a year or even 100 books a week. Recently, a TikTok went viral where somebody revealed their secret. They weren't actually reading, they were skimming AI generated summaries. Then you've got reviewers saying books have too much text or people admitting they only read the dialogue. At that point, you have to wonder, do they even like books? Or is being seen as a reader more important than actually reading? You see, I'm not against content creation surrounding books, and I'm definitely not against the idea that it's bad that Gen Z has made reading popular. Before we had Book Talk, we had BookTube, and quite frankly, that association just sounds very wrong, but I had to make it to prove that bookish content has been around on the internet for quite some time. The problem lies with how small form bookish content seems to treat reading like a fast fashion moment instead of what the actual purpose of books is. That is intellectualism, even if not everybody reads books for that. I'm not saying that everybody on TikTok is inherently stupid, but the way books are treated over there is nothing more than an aesthetic. Thanks to that, we have men whom women would refuse to touch with a 10-foot pole pretending to enjoy books for attention. We have also seen coquette girlies posing with books for similar reasons. It's one of those trends that has seeped so deeply into the internet culture that influencers from diverse niches are also hopping onto bookish content mostly because it's popular. However, there's an entire demographic that spends hours setting up a display and taking photographs of their favorite books for Instagram. Or the people who write too many notes in their books or put too many tabs on their favorite parts and draw cute stuff around the text. This leads to a very common assumption that these people are not actually reading, and I do disagree with that because annotation is nothing new and has been around since the dawn of literature. What people often confuse them with are people who buy books as an accessory or a decoration piece, or people who just buy books to come across as someone who's well read. Funny enough, there's nothing new about that either. So, what does it really mean when people say that reading has become an aesthetic because of book talk? It means that books have become a commodity, and I will get back to that later with context to how publishing industry capitalizes on it. Aesthetic is defined as a visual language, and everything from rainbow bookshelves to secondhand book stacks is an aesthetic. And that's not really what people mean when they're criticizing people for treating reading as an aesthetic. What it really means is people posing with books, owning specific titles that look good in a flat lay, or creating this online reader identity the same way someone curates their fashion or skincare routine. And this is where it gets tricky. When books stop being read and start being worn, their function shifts altogether. A book isn't about social commentary anymore, it's about what it signals about you. This weird assumption that just because someone is taking pretty pictures of their books, they're not actually reading is a very wrong way to approach this problem. Where I draw my line is when people on BookTok, especially men, post with books for clout. You're not a vibe, dude. In other words, reading as an aesthetic isn't just about bookshelves or annotations. It's about books being stripped of their content and turned into brand logos for personality. And once you see it like that, you can't unsee it because it's not about literature anymore, it's about consumer culture. And the publishing industry, unsurprisingly, is more than happy to play along. I've often come across the term anti-intellectualism whenever I see people talk about book talk. So I did some investigation, and there are two primary factors to this. First of all, I completely agree with the fact that the way people are treating books on BookTok, skimming through them to get hundreds of books done a year, should not be counted as reading. To read something, you have to critically engage with the text, and if you're just skimming through a Kafka, you'd hardly understand a thing that he's trying to say. And that's where the second problem comes into play. That is that these people on BookTok are not actually reading Kafka, most of them are reading romances, men and women alike. Now, historically, romance is a genre that has been looked down on, even though it's what keeps the publishing industry in business. But I reckon you're missing that much if you're just skimming through all the text in a Colleen Hoover novel. Which also brings me to the question, why are you reading in the first place though? It wouldn't be wrong to assume in such a case that you're just reading to come across as someone who's cool or well read, and you're just using books as a prop for your aesthetic. One reviewer on TikTok said that she skips over the descriptions because she doesn't really care what the characters look like, while another one talked about how she doesn't care about the backstories of the characters and just wants to read the action. It's an ongoing discourse that BookTok is actually a good thing because at least it's getting people to read more, but I don't really agree with that, because these people are not reading, they're just buying books, and since it's being treated like a trend, it's not going to be a long-term thing and will eventually die down. There's no denying the fact that romance and smut are the predominant genres on BookTok, and sometimes they just throw in an RF Kwong to sound deep. The thing with books clashing with influencer culture is that they're pushing out the same easy escapist books that don't really require a lot of thinking or critical engagement. And that, in my opinion, really contributes to the rise of anti-intellectualism. Even the people who do engage with literature as it's meant to be sometimes read romance books and make fun of it, and it gets them a lot of engagement. We also have to take it into account how TikTok's algorithm is severely different from, say, YouTube. BookTok influencers tend to make outrageous, rage bait style content that guarantees them views, and hence they also tend to talk about the already popular books, and the cycle just keeps on going. I reckon that anyone has the power to decide which book gets popular next. We've seen everything from The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood to White Nights by Dostoevsky getting popular on BookTok. Now let me just talk about how White Nights is so romanticized on BookTok and hardly anyone ever talks about how the main character is supposed to be a self-centered incel. Again, nobody on BookTok is reading critically and they're all just reading what everybody else is reading because that's what gets them the clicks. Every now and then someone makes a stupid video and it gets on everybody's nerves and it ends up getting viral and everybody starts writing think pieces over it like I'm doing right now. Also, I'd like to mention that TikTok's algorithm only works in your favor if you're putting out a lot of content. And these content creators need to stay updated with their books, so in order to have every new popular book on their feed, they skim through the books and pretend to have read them. Same with the girl who uses AI summaries to get done with 100 books a week. At the end of the day, it all waters down to how many popular books you've read this month and which ones are on the way. On BookTok, it's no longer about engaging with literature critically, and hence there's this anti-intellectual epidemic. And that's just one side of the problem, and it has quite a few other sides as well. For instance, consumerism. Consumerism around books is not a new concept. We all remember where we were when Sarah J. Maas got 13 editions of her book and everybody on book Twitter was writing their hot takes. I'll get back to how publishing industry focuses on quantity over quality, but first I would like to talk about how we as readers engage with literature in a very consumerist way. We've all seen book hauls, haven't we? And we've also seen the book haul subsequently being followed by book unhauls. There's a running joke in the book community that reading books and buying books are two separate hobbies. But babes, I don't think it's a joke anymore. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that owning a bunch of books is wrong, but like I talked about it earlier, owning every popular book is basically essential now. If you're not talking about the new thing, your views are bound to tank, and I don't blame the BookTok people for playing the game by its rules. However, that doesn't exempt anyone from the fact that BookTok is rooted in consumerist culture. There's also this trend on BookTok where this idea is enforced that if you're not enjoying the books that you have, you can always go and buy new ones. Personally, in the past, I felt pressurized to be reading and buying popular books instead of finding books that align with my personal taste because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. I'm glad it doesn't affect me anymore, but BookTok people are in trenches. Primarily, BookTok is supposed to be short form reviews, but lately more and more of the TikToks are just enormous book hauls by these influencers. That's because for the amount of content that you need to churn out on TikTok to make a living off of it, book reviews are simply not enough because one can only read enough books. That's why content creators are preferring to make hauls and unhauls instead of talking about what they liked or disliked in a book or what important messages the book had to give. Because once again, we are no longer reading critically. Another form of this consumerism is buying all the new editions of the same book. Like that girl spending $5,000 on a bunch of copies of Fourth Wing. Like, Is it ever that serious? Remember how I talked about rage bait style videos? Now this one kills two birds with a single stone. Because on one hand we have people who are criticizing her for spending all that money on the same book, while on the other hand we have fans of Fourth Wing who are gushing over all the copies. And both groups are equally engaging with the content. And it's not just limited to that, by the way. Reading a lot of books one after another just to hit your reading goal is also a problem. This year, I set my reading goal to 100 books and I'm severely behind it. To catch up, I decided to read one book a day throughout the month of August and gave up on day 6 because it was simply not fun. I'm truly coming from a place of understanding why people feel inclined to read and buy more books, and if they don't, there's always a sense of not reading enough. It's like BookTok has taken out the joy and reason from reading and has turned it into a giant capitalist mess. And that brings me to the final section of this video, how the publishing industry plays heavily into the bookish consumerism. Milking a popular book to extreme levels is the publishing industry's favorite hobby. Exhibit A, the Poppy War Trilogy. Now this book came out in 2018, 7 to 8 years ago. I need one sane person to tell me why there's a new Illumicrate box set coming out in the good 2025. And mind you, this is their second time selling the Poppy War box set. Meanwhile, the publisher is also putting out special editions, with the first two already out and the third one on the way. Is it ever that serious? Exhibit B, Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. Now this book was a standalone novel based on a play by the same author, and it came out around the same time as the Poppy War. The first book got really popular and the author was commissioned to write more books, and eventually it becomes a whole ass series. I've read the first 3 books in the series and I stopped reading on book 4 because as I read it became more and more evident that these books did not exist for the love of writing but for the love of capitalism. I mean, get that bag, but still no. The first book ended pretty well and the rest is just a cash grab. On top of everything, these books also have their special editions which are really pretty, I would give it that, but does it really add anything to the content of the book? No. Exhibit C, House and Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. Now when this book came out, there were like 13 separate editions of this book, and 5 of these contained bonus chapters distinctively. So in case you were a fan and wanted to read all the bonus chapters, you had to buy 5 separate copies to get all of the content. This was nothing but a cash grab scheme again, and you best believe it worked fairly well. This is not just limited to Sarah J. Maas. Authors like Tahra Mafi are still clinging to the remains of their series, and their publishers are putting out a new special edition every year. This is not just an economic issue, this is also a social and environmental issue. People buy all the copies of the same book or just the popular books, and once they're not popular anymore, they unhaul them because realistically nobody has that kind of space in their house. A counter argument is often presented that they're just donating the books, but the question arises, who would really want those books once they're not popular anymore? It's like fast fashion all over again, but this time it's with books. There is no current study on it, but can we really guarantee that this is not eventually going to create a lot of waste? And mind you, paper comes from wood, so we have that problem as well. We need to ask the question at what extent publishing industry is willing to go to make profit off of books that actually have no value. Like again with Sarah J. Maas, do we really need the entire 800-page novel for the bonus 20-page chapter at the end? If the content is really that important, why not publish all of it separately in a short book all in one place? But that will not be profitable. And as long as these sort of behaviors are around BookTok, there is no end in sight. That was all for today's video. If you guys liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you have anything to add to this conversation, drop it in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Until my next video, goodbye.